Perspectives, Finding Common Ground, a podcast series that brings together a panel of thought leader perspectives as a forum to socialize and problem solve education technology issues with the goal to ultimately find common ground.
Hello, I'm Patrick Devaney, and I'd like to welcome you to this episode of Perspectives, Finding Common Ground. Today we have a very intriguing conversation about rolling AI out in education in classrooms today. We have three wonderful guests to help us explore this topic. I'm going to give them the opportunity to introduce themselves and share their perspective on this topic. Why don't we start with you, Maureen?
Great. Thank you so much for having me. My name's Maureen Young. I am a partner success manager at School AI, which is an AI-powered learning experience design platform for educators and to use with students. My background is that I was a public school educator for 16 years and then also a tech coach for the last 9 years, helping teachers to integrate technology into their classrooms. And so kind of how I got my start with AI was as a tech coach when ChatGPT first came out back in November of 2022, which feels like a million years ago at this point, even though it was such a short time ago. And so I really started just digging into the power that AI could have for educators and saving them time and making them more efficient. And then I started turning my attention to how we can make this accessible for students and get them, into these platforms and really using them. And one of the biggest things for me as a former middle school teacher was the sort of the gap of where my kids could access these types of GenAI tools because they had terms of service of 18 and up or 13 and up. And so that was where I kind of devoted a lot of my attention and came across School AI and fell in love with the platform. And now I get to talk about how to make meaningful learning experiences with AI tools every single day with innovative schools all over the country and all over the world. So I'm very, very honored to be a part of this conversation with such amazing other guests.
Well, fantastic. And we're lucky to have you with us with your experience. So thank you so much for joining. I guess next we'll go with you, Jeff.
Sure. I'm Jeff McCoy. I'm the Associate Superintendent for Greenville County Schools in South Carolina. Similar to Maureen, when ChatGPT came out in 2022, I kind of jumped on that pretty quickly just because of some of the potential I'm sure we'll talk about in this session. And then my good friend, Dr. Cheryl Abshire, and myself started doing presentations around the country and within school districts. Just around the power and the potential AI has to bring from an equity standpoint to all students, and really just how it can really save teachers time in the classroom, which ultimately we know if we can save teachers time, it just gives them more time that they can give back to students individually or in small groups. And that was really kind of my jumping on AI and continuing to stay on AI and, share our journey, the way we've used AI in Greenville County and how we're rolling out with other school districts.
Fantastic. So glad to have you here with us today, Jeff. And last but not least, Adam, can you please introduce yourself?
Patrick. So yeah, I'm a former elementary school teacher. When I left the classroom, I was involved with professional development around project-based learning in school districts around the country, mostly focused on Title I schools. And then I actually went on to lead Dell's education strategy team for K-12 and high ed for North America. And similar to these folks, November 2022 was an interesting moment for me because I was leading a team and we were doing stuff around esports and cybersecurity, and it was all great. But when I saw ChatGPT, my entire world just changed. And so I basically shut down for like a month. I don't think my team even saw me because I was just like reading and prompting and doing all sorts of things and just kind of fell in love with the actual technology because I could start to see the potential. And so now I'm helping school systems, starting at cabinet level, to really build out those guidelines, frameworks, and policies they need, and then make sure they have their AI literacy plan.
Fantastic. Thanks, Adam. And I can personally attest to Adam's use of AI and experience with AI is great because I just attended a session a couple of weeks ago where we actually discussed the topic of AI and used AI in the formulation of many of the results. And so it was a wonderful immersion experience. So I think it's a great perspective to have. I guess I would start this as we should probably start any of our conversations is around the schools and what happens in the schools and for the students. And I think I'd like to start with you, Jeff, and talk a little bit about what factors, just a few of the pillars that need to be considered when school leaders are considering how and when and why they might implement using AI in their district.
Sure. I think with any technology or any tool, curriculum, what have you, I think always looking at what the benefit to students ultimately, and whether that has some benefit to adults that then helps save time for adults to be able to work with students. I think for us, it was important. This is kind of a new thing, as Adam said. It was kind of very different from previous, I guess, tools, if you want to call it that. Although I think it's much more than a tool. You know, for the first time that I know, I've been in Greenville for 25 years. For the first time ever in Greenville, we as a senior leadership actually released a position statement on AI, to actually tell teachers and staff, we want you to embrace, we want you to use it ethically, we want you to use it responsibly, but we want you to embrace AI because it has so many potential to break down barriers for our kids that are the highest at risk and highest need. And it has time to give teachers time back that they need that's so valuable in the classroom. And so really from there, we built a plan out, starting with our senior leadership team. I started really by showing them what ChatGPT was. We didn't take a month like Adam did. I feel like I could have taken a month with them, but we did a little 2-hour session with them and really kind of talked. Many of them had never seen or heard of AI or what do you do with this? And so really giving them an idea, and immediately they saw the potential that it had in our schools. And so we released that position statement, and from there we really formed the guidelines that we put out for students and teachers, and have been really going from there. And I'll talk about, I guess, more details about that later, but are really, like I said, I think it's different from anything I've done in 25 years where it actually got involved from a senior leadership level versus kind of maybe, mid-level management or even a school level.
Yeah, and Patrick, I just would say that what Jeff was talking about, like some of the work at the district level that really sets a school leader up for success is this idea of guiding principles, right? Like human at the center, right? Removing bias, transparency, those types of things really help a school leader. And actually, with ClassLink, we've developed a GPT that helps school districts kind of build out that infrastructure to support that. The second thing that Jeff said that I just want to make sure that we're double clicking on is that process is just as important as product. And so we've engaged school leaders in looking at what would a process be if you think a child is cheating and using AI, and just having them sit down and try to figure out what an escalation process would be was very tactical for them. They know they have policies for if they think a kid's cheating, but when you throw in all this nuance around, well, first of all, what are you using to actually define cheating? And is it a plagiarism tool that we already know can't be the only thing you're using? And then what do you do on the first offense, second offense? All of those things that kind of wrap into it, we recognize pretty quickly that it's not just handing school leaders, a thing and saying, here, do this now. That process is just as important as product in what we're doing here.
I think one of the things that school leaders, it just in my conversations with leaders, both in my former district as well as, the school leaders I've talked to, in my work now, there's this fear around we have to know the answer for every single possible scenario. And you can't, like this technology is changing so rapidly. So it's knowing, like you said, like what kinds of academic honesty policies do we have? What kinds of uses are we looking for? How are we protecting student data? I think you'd mentioned, Jeff, like these pillars. And I think those are the pieces that if school leaders can focus on and just kind of alleviate some of their worries about having to have the right answers and having to have a specific policy for every scenario, but instead look at it from a bigger picture of what are our major concerns with this type of technology and how are we going to address those from, a responsibility and integrity, a pedagogical lens, like how are we looking at those from a big picture standpoint? I think if they're able to recognize that that's all you need in order to be able to set the foundation for this type of technology, then they'll start to feel a lot more comfortable with it. And I'm glad that there are other school leaders like you that are, sharing these types of ideas with others.
Yeah, but the one thing I would say that Jeff said that I think is really important for people to kind of focus on is he said we started at the district level and at the cabinet level for Jeff to make sure they understood, like, this isn't magic. Let's talk about what is this technology. Let's build some guiding principles and guidance. We can, like, a lot of the things you said, Maureen, are important, but those were one click up, I think, thing. We want to bring those down to the school leader. They shouldn't be worrying about security and cyber. Like, that's not at their level. But at some point, then implementation, if the district does their job and builds the right framework and guidelines.
And I like, and both of you touched on this, which I like and appreciate. I think not there's a right or wrong way to do it, but I think what both you and Adam said, Maureen, really about the policy side. From what we had a conversation, there was an immediate initial even on cabinet or senior leadership to jump to, we need a policy for AI, and really kind of took a step back to say, you know what, we already have policies for technology and how we use technology. Pretty much everything that's covered in that covers AI. So more importantly, let's actually not leave anything to imagination from staff to say, "Oh, will district let us use this, or should we use it?" Let's just go out and say, "We want you to embrace. We want you to use it ethically. We want you to use it morally. We want you to use it responsibly. We want you to embrace." And I think, Maureen, to your point, same thing with the cheating. We already have integrity policies. We have plagiarism policies. We have all of. Well, we are focusing on in our district. My English department, my English academic specialist, is working with the English department chairs and bringing that back and saying, I'm sure both of you have seen the textbook graphic with what is plagiarism and kind of in the world of AI. Using that as a starting point to talk about focusing so much on keeping kids from cheating, let's really focus our energy on how do we design assignments that are more relevant for this century, and really what does cheating look like in this world? And North Carolina did a great job building that red light, green light, yellow light, where we give permission to kids. Hey, you can use AI in this case. Maybe not so much on this case though, but really setting some guidelines. So what we're wrestling through, we're focusing our energy more on what do we need to redefine versus actually creating a bunch of policies and guidelines that really are just going to get bogged down the innovation ultimately.
Yeah, to Jeff's point, there is one state right now that is telling every school district you need a policy, and that's Tennessee by July 1. So I'm working with Metro Nashville, and we built our guiding principles. And then, the guy who is the liaison with the board around policy grabbed a policy doc and he said, look, those guiding principles, we'll fit those right in here because those things aren't going to change. Like the technology's changing. And that became, their board policy, which was brilliant, right? Like, because you want to be high level, that's not something you want to be going back to a board with. That's why we hear a lot of people on these panels yelling policy, policy. Jeff's point, very little of this is policy.
It sounds like what I'm hearing anyway is you don't need detailed policies. What you really need are mile markers, and you need to check in at the mile markers to make sure that your principles are being implemented and to adjust or tweak what's happening. Is that a fair assessment? Great. So
yeah, I think Patrick, for us, or what I've seen, just and for Adam has and Maureen too, traveling around the country, and I really feel like this is the catalyst, at least from my side, as the academic standpoint. The catalyst that's actually going to force academic and education to change. We've said that for years. I realize, but unlike anything else, this really is doing it, because we really have to rethink what is cheating look like, and really what assignments look like in the 21st and 22nd century, where kids really, what they have to know is different, and how they access information is different. So I really, from an excitement standpoint, also I know fear for a lot of people, but I do think it's going to turn our chaos and our world into chaos, and already have in a lot of ways. It's turned our world into chaos that we have to kind of get ahead of and say, how do we work with it against it?
Yeah, and I see the turning point really over the next year where folks on the curriculum side will start thinking about process with curriculum design, process with feedback on curriculum, but also how do we redesign assessment? Because think about this, in a world where we now can empower the learner to say, I'm ready for the formative, rather than the teacher to say, I think you're ready for the formative, it changes the dynamic because the data still flows to the teacher, it flows to the kid. And that allows us to get to then more performance-based things where we can really drill down on these durable skills or these more human-centric skills that we've been talking about for years, and do it in ways that are more competency-based. So I agree with Jeff. I think like people are still just trying to get the framework and stuff in place just to make sure we have things so that we can do the professional learning and teachers feel like they're ready to roll, because the data that just came out was that 35% of high school teachers think that this is bad. Right? So anytime you enter a high school faculty, you stand up there and go, this is the most amazing thing ever. You've already lost 35% of the crowd, right? Like, you have to be able to just point, like, talk about the risks and the possibilities here, and then get them into a place where they can augment things they want to offload and really focus on the things that are important to them as a teacher.
And I think that there's that 35%, a lot of them probably are teachers who've been in the field for decades. And they're tired of the silver bullet conversations. They're tired of hearing the same thing being peddled of like, oh, this is going to change everything. This is going to revolutionize. But what we're really seeing here is that this isn't a thing. Our CEO always says AI is not the thing. It's the thing that gets us to the thing. And what we're trying to do is get to learning, get to meaningful learning experiences. And I think that once we help educators realize that this should not ever be one more thing for you. This should be a thing that gets you to what you're trying to do, which is to engage students, to create meaningful learning experiences. And so I think that's a big, something we have to do in our implementation. And, in these conversations we're having with educators to help them understand that, like, this is a literacy. This is a new way of thinking about the way we learn and obtain knowledge. And so we not only do we have a responsibility to do this for ourselves as professionals, but also for our students.
Yes, and that and fear. Like, and Jeff can attest to this as well. It's like, when you enter a room, there's a lot of people who, if this is the first time they're touching this, anything they've read in the news, some of them come in the room thinking this is Terminator. Like, they don't know. And so you have to overcome the fear. And one of the things that I do pretty early on is I have them use it for something personal before they actually start thinking about it for work, to try to help them. And even yesterday, there was a group of superintendents, and one of them was like, I've been using this for a month, never thought about using it personally. Right. So I think it's also, addressing that there is fear and then helping them overcome that in those first couple of interactions.
And I agree with that, Adam. I always start when I do district training around the country, I always start with the personal. Because I think it's easier sometimes to prompt engineer personal than it is prompt engineer sometimes the professional. For our teachers, we committed this year to train all 6,000 teachers in ChatGPT, Magic School, and School AI. And really, honestly, and I don't remember who said it. I believe it was Digital Promise CEO. But unlike other tools, and I've been doing it for a long time, 25 years. I'm not as much seeing, our team is not as much seeing the resistance to this within the first 10, 15 minutes. When teachers start realizing what it can do in the power, there's very few people that are not on board with, okay, this is going to save me a bunch of time. We really start with that first. How is it going to save me time as a teacher? And then to your point, Maureen, really then going into, okay, now how do we shape learning experience? How do we use it to remove barriers for our special needs students or our ML students? So I think, unlike many, you want to call it a tool, but any advancement in the past, I think people can connect to it. And even in curriculum writing, we spend days writing learning targets. My team and a bunch of teachers the other day, they said, can you buy a pro version of ChatGPT? We bought that within the hour. They had those learning targets done within an hour. It generated, they edited, they aligned to standards. They're like, it would take days before to do that. So the realization of time back, which ultimately means more time with kids, really sell, I think, hopefully 90% plus of our teachers on this thing.
We're really saying there's a different set of measures that we need to look at. It sounds like that's what's really being reinvented here, or needs to be reinvented, is how do we measure success? What are we looking at? We had a question that we were going to talk about, measuring, to what measurements do we need to make sure that we're supporting all students? But in reality, it's what are we measuring differently in order to really leverage this technology?
Sort of. I mean, I think if I would have asked Jeff this question and Maureen this question before AI, right, they would have said important things like collaboration and problem solving, and those are the things to measure. However, they know that that's not what somebody else thinks is important, and those are folks that are more on the standardized approach to testing. I think that we actually know within a school system, what's important to measure. We haven't landed on how, right? And how do we do that at scale so that it's much easier, right? The one thing I would say is that I think what people are landing on is this idea of, okay, now I can put a rubric in and then I can feed all my writing in. And I think right now, especially where the LLMs are sitting, that's a bit of a flawed model. It removes the human at the center, first of all. And second, Leon Furs out of Australia took the same paper, right? 5 different names, fed it through, same rubric, and got 5 different scores, right? So we have to really understand that at the end of the day, we're still dealing with humans and kids, and they want feedback and they want to know their teacher understand. So are we training the system based on the human and scoring like human and less about just letting the LLM take over? And that's going to really, it'll hyper scale our assessments when we get to good models, but we just have to be cautious as we move the approach.
I think that always, when we do trainings, even with our teachers specifically, and even leaders when I do across the country, is really, you always have to start with the human, because you have to end with the problem. And the human has to end with the problem. AI is going to do the work next, and you have to end with the human too. I don't think anybody responsibly should take what AI throws out and immediately copy and paste. That is going to become the new digital literacy skill for our kids. We have to teach them how to ethically use that. You just can't copy and paste whatever AI throws out, throw it in a paper and turn it in. That's going to get you in trouble when you go out into the workforce as well. And they're really teaching our students and teachers, HAIH, or as Adam said, human in the center, that it has to start and end with the human in order to get the results that are ethical, certainly. And also a big thing that Adam mentioned from the beginning is the bias free is very much bias centered right now in many cases. And I don't know if it's a bad thing. People tout that as a bad thing, but I've always said our job as an educator, as a former English teacher, I always taught my kids to look for bias. No matter if it was in a library book or a magazine or a website, bias is not necessarily something we want our kids to be able to identify. And one of the best ways to be able to do that is to give them examples of that. And I've seen some amazing examples with AI that are very, biased, that you can really use with kids. There's kind of a in-your-face bias, and then you can kind of back it off from there, so as kids can kind of recognize subtle bias. But it's going to be, again, I think that's going to be a digital literacy skill moving forward.
Yeah, imagine a world where the student takes the assignment, brings it into generative AI. The teacher gets the assignment, brings it into generative AI. Then it's just generative AI assignment, right? Like we definitely have to make sure that we're guarding against that for sure.
And I think the foundational things here that I hear from both you, Jeff, and Adam, are like the human-centric piece of this is like, that's when we're evaluating different tools. So thinking about this like partnership between like these AI tools that exist that are being marketed specifically for schools and the schools and districts, like the partnership should be through an understanding of that tool has to do something to meet your needs in your school. And so whatever that need is, but the AI cannot determine what those needs are. Those humans that are involved in that conversation are the ones who are going to determine what those needs are. What are your populations of students? How do we need to connect with them? What support systems do we need? And so that's that for me is like, when I'm thinking about does AI need to do this job for me, or could AI do this job for me? Is it going to meet the need that I'm setting for and help me make deeper connections with the humans that are involved in my decision making and in my classroom, especially?
So it sounds like there's lots of potential, there's lots of upside. We all agree there, and we have to let the population run with it. Students, teachers, to get things going. There also has to be some risk. There has to be some downsides that we have to, in at least good faith, attempt to avoid or to prevent. Can we talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, I mean, look, the title of the presentation that I do is, Curious World of Generative AI, Risks and Possibilities. I think that if we're going around the country and we're helping school systems and we're not bringing a balance of both, we're not doing our jobs, right? And I'll throw one risk out there, because if you ask this question to the folks that are actually leading with these foundational models, frontier models, top three short-term risks, the number one is misinformation, disinformation, right? And that, falls squarely for us on school systems. We've been for years, building programs around digital literacy and digital citizenship. However, we haven't done a lot with deepfakes. We haven't done a lot with images. A lot of it's been very much about Google and texting. And so we have to rethink the way that we're doing these things, but we have to do it within the context of these tools are getting so good that the human may never be able to detect on their own. And we're going to have some strategies beyond just the human looking at the image. I'm sure you all have seen the New York Times quiz where you have to guess whether it's human or AI generated. And I do it with audiences all the time, and the average is about 4 out of 10 that get it right. So I think one of those risks, Patrick, is definitely misinformation. I'll just kind of open it up there for a bit.
My biggest concern as a decision influencer, I was just a tech coach, so I won't say I'm a decision maker, but definitely a decision influencer, was my responsibility to protect students' data privacy. And I think for me, in addition, definitely misinformation, bias, those are big concerns. I think about if we're encouraging students to use these AI tools, what's happening to their data? And if we are using these types of tools in schools and districts, we're making that decision for students. And so are we doing our due diligence to ensure that any sort of, data that these platforms are collecting is keeping this private from these large language models, because those kids cannot consent to having their data used to train a large language model. And so I think there are a lot of amazing platforms that are out there. And my first question is always, what are you doing to protect student data? That's my biggest question. So, and I'm sure Jeff, you can speak to that.
That's one level of student data. I just want to say the second level of student data is what happens, because there's a lot of new companies that are entering in the edtech market with GenAI. And I've been reading some of their data privacy statements. And many of them say, yes, we will follow all of your data privacy laws and rules unless we are bought, sold, or go back. And I have a problem with that. I think that, that to your point, Maureen, is student data that now we have no control over, and they're going to sell that. So I think that that's another thing we need to be thinking about.
And I agree. And I think in that regard too, I think going back to our very original conversation too, when we kind of looked at that, the data privacy piece, really, we have the data privacy. We've kind of applied our same data privacy policies with some tweaks, but to the AI tools as well, because, we've always trained our teachers. They could give away student information on many platforms that wasn't vetted by our systems, So same thing. I mean, vetting those and saying, hey, you got to be careful what information you're feeding into it, like you would with any system on that. So again, applying that, I know with AI, things like sometimes things get thrown out the window because of new technology, but really applying your same standards of practice you would to any tool that you would put out there. And we talked about bias already. I think that's one of the big risks again, but it's also an opportunity. I think it's an opportunity to really teach our children how to look for that bias piece. And one of the risks I always talk about as well when I'm doing leaders, and I did interview you with Adam as you've gone around the country in surveying data, but when I survey folks about, where they are with AI and implementation, there's still, sometimes, it's not a judgment, because I think everybody has to be where they are and make this journey. But, still I'm finding 15 to 20% of people who are kind of like right now, no, we're banning it. We're really not doing anything with it. We're just banning it. And I think the risk there is, by doing that, what are we risking for our students that have an opportunity to open up and really widen the equity gap? The kids have access to it at home. You can ban it at school. They have access. Those who have access at home. Those who don't, just like everything else, they don't have access to it at home. So, and many times we're widening that equity gap if we take a hard stand. And again, if you're not there yet, that's okay. But at least be open-minded in, if we don't do this, what are the risks? If we don't implement AI, what are the risks? And I think if you go down that path, you'll find those risks are great, from preparing students for futures, from and widening that equity gap, and really not providing opportunities for our children, like I said before, who are at most at risk. The MLs and our SPED students who really can use this tool to get their ideas out that previously they really struggled with.
I've always thought that AI it's a great equalizer. It's a great opportunity, if done properly, to fill in those gaps, to provide a much more equitable space. But it requires very deliberate attention to that need in order to bring about those results.
Well, and also to Jeff's point, you need to provide access and then support within the process. But even think about the AI plagiarism tool. Like there's an equity in that because to Jeff's point, those kids that know how to get around it and have resources to help them, they're going to do it's the same cheating. They're just getting around it. Where those kids that don't have access to the resources, they'll just keep getting caught, right? There's inequities in that model. The other thing that, I talk to audiences about quite a bit is I only need 3 seconds of your voice. And now I can clone your voice. And so imagine, a principal sitting there waiting for kids to show up and no one's there because some kid got bored in class, took their voice, hacked into the robocall system and let everyone know they don't need to come to school, right? Like, so there's inherent risks in, the power of this technology, even with voice cloning and other things.
Oh, Adam, you are devious. You got in trouble in school all the time. Didn't
Well, I
you?
did actually. Good point.
How about some examples? There's a lot going on, and it seems to be accelerating. Does anybody have examples of what has been done, what's worked, what hasn't worked, that we can talk through a little?
I mean, there's tons of examples, of course. When I work with small districts, don't have PI officers or communication officers and all that. I mean, tons of examples on how that's just streamlining things. But down to the student level, what we're talking about, I was observing a classroom and we're training our teachers first. So they have students don't have access yet to ChatGPT because our teachers wanted to be trained first. That was our first goal this year. That was something we gave in deference to our teachers. But the teacher really was actually still using it. He generated 5 different 5-paragraph stories, 5 different ones, and had the kids in groups analyze which one was the best one. And she had this whole great plan. And really what ended up being is kids were like, well, we kind of like this one over here, this paragraph better than this paragraph over here, but we like this better. And of course that was all in her plan. And she said, well, let's talk about what would happen if you combine them then? Why don't you combine those into what you think it should be? And of course, kids did that. And then they realized, of course, because they're from different stories, you have to redo some topic sentences and some enders because it doesn't flow anymore. And so through that really very powerful exercise, I think, like she said, the kid collaborated and we're talking more about writing than they ever would have talked about had they just assigned a 5-paragraph essay and said, go home and do this 5-paragraph essay. And so I think it's the creativity of those kinds of teachers where it's not cheating. We want you to use ChatGPT. But the assignment was designed in such a way that really it was difficult to cheat on that assignment because there was accountability. It was group work with accountability, but the kids still learn. They learn how to rewrite topic sentences. They learn how to put paragraphs together. And so I think it's that creativity of our teachers that we really can turn loose once they get familiar with the tool and let them design what the curriculum is going to look like for the future.
When I was in the classroom just about going on about 8 months ago, I, as I mentioned, was like desperately seeking out resources that I could use that are, generative AI chats with my students, and had just come across School AI when I was looking for this in a search on a forum or something, and thought, okay, well, I'm gonna launch one of these spaces. The spaces are the AI powered chatbots that the teachers design. So I'm just going to launch one and see how it goes. If it's a total bust, no big deal. I launched it as a bell ringer and thought, okay, well, that's low risk. And as my students started joining the chat, I realized, okay, I can see all their chats, which I knew because I had played with it before. I launched it with students, of course. But I could see all of their chats. And all of a sudden I'm seeing responses from kids who I normally never hear from unless I cold call on them, which I hated doing. That was like my own personal, makes me cringe. I know we got to do it because we got to hear from all the kids. But, and then I started seeing some more insights from some specific kids. And one of my kiddos had said that she was having a terrible day because she had failed a test. And this was a child who would never have talked to me, unless I basically hovered over her like a creeper. And so seeing that connection, I knew immediately, I had to go make a personal connection with that student just so she knew, hey, you got somebody in your corner, somebody's here for you, I see what you're going through and I just want to connect. And I just about jumped over tables to try to get to her because I knew that this was game changing for me. This was data that I would not have been able to get in any other way, short of having individual conversations with all 35 of my kids in the class at that time, which we just don't have time for as educators. And so for me, what these types of, AI chats that we can in these education specific platforms do is they don't take the work from me. They're super powering the work I'm already doing. And so what I was able to do from, reading through all of their chats in a super quick, manner while I was taking attendance at the same time was to be able to say, okay, everyone already has this prior knowledge of what I had planned for this activity today. I'm going to now take this to a different level and, rework my lesson on the fly. So I think for me, it was that holy moly moment of this is not just powerful for kids to be able to generate ideas where they might not feel comfortable sharing out loud, where they might not have those ideas, but also it's giving me so much knowledge and insight into my kids and what they know or don't know, that now I'm getting to do all that personalization and that differentiation that I have always wanted to do, but just didn't have the mental space, the capacity, the time. And so that for me was a huge moment as an educator.
I'll give you a quick teacher one and then some district level one. The teacher one I thought was super interesting was the teacher actually just went into ChatGPT or Gemini, I can't remember which one it was, and took an assignment they normally have kids write about, and they had ChatGPT write it. And they gave that to the kid and said, okay, I want you to make this better. I want you to find the things that are maybe were hallucinated. And so the kids actually had a starting point, and then they built on it and made something better, which I thought was a pretty cool way to Jeff's point, to make the thinking visible, to say like, these things aren't terrible. They're just not 100%. Like, how do you understand what you do when you get the output? So that was a pretty cool example. We have a bunch of school districts that have gone through this process. Ottawa Catholic is one of them that stands out, where they have now built all their guidelines, framework, redid their policy, their academic integrity, like really went through the hard work. And they've started now rolling this out into schools and with teachers. And they even hosted a conference for neighboring school districts to kind of start giving back. We have another model out in BC where we have 14 school districts that are coming together with the ministry to actually make sure they can take the guidance from the ministry and then build the tools they need underneath, but doing it more collaboratively. And then school districts like Henrico County that started this work in February 23 that have really led the way as well. So there are plenty of examples of school districts that are putting things in place to make sure that when we get to that school and teacher level, there's not that struggle of we have 27 questions and no answer.
Just for in recognition of time, we have to close fairly closely, but there's one community that I think we haven't talked about yet, and that is the larger community and parents and engaging them in this process and in this journey. And any thoughts on how to do that effectively, and do that successfully?
Well, I think I'll say just for us, when we released that position statement to our teachers, we also accompanied it with a video that was to the community and the parents. So that was full public as far as what we were able to embrace to our community or express to our community as far as our position go. It gave us the opportunity to explain to some of those parents who are like, oh, I'm very anti-AI, I don't use AI, and then kind of explain that, well, you use Black Study, use this, use that, and they're, and realizing, oh, well, they do use AI, and so. Again, it goes back to what Adam said. It's a lot of it's fear and misinformation about what they think AI is or do is take over the world type scenario. But, when you actually sit down for most of those people and have an intelligent conversation with them about here's what AI is and does. And also, I'm never afraid to pull in stats. It's what companies and businesses are saying is going to happen in the next 2 or 3 years. Our biggest job is preparing your kid to move out of your house and get a gainfully employed job. And so by doing that, and we're going to train them on how to use AI.
And not come back, right, Jeff?
And ideally not come back, right?
I would say that. I would say the other thing I think that I've seen that's successful is having the kids actually do the parent night and training the parent. So I've seen that model, and I think that that's pretty good. I like what Jeff said though. Like, you have to have some transparency in language. So using video so that the communication goes out in a way that is standardized and not have 10 different people across a big school district like Jeff's kind of sending 10 different messages. So the use of video, I think, has been super important. And then really making those nights more about like personal use of these things and not bringing them in to say, let me tell you about how we're using it at school. but first getting them to actually use the tools themselves, then you can get into, and here's what we're going to do for you.
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing that I'm hearing from Jeff and from other districts is that importance of transparency. And I love that idea, Adam, of like a consistent message, like really helping them to understand like this is here. It's already existing. You're already using it. It's not going anywhere. And here's how we're doing it in a thoughtful, safe way that's really supporting the educators and the students in learning these digital literacy skills. And then just, really making sure that they have a place to answer questions. I love that idea, Adam, of having kids run the parent night. I wrote that down. I'm so excited about that idea. I love whenever you can get kids' voices in, that's where it's at. Like that's way more valuable than hearing my voice. Having the students share those ideas, that's huge.
Yeah, one plug, Patrick, for a resource that should be out pretty soon is OpenAI actually has partnered with Common Sense Media to create parent resources. So hopefully those will be out soon to really help districts as well.
Great. Hopefully we can link those to this podcast when we post it. I want to do a very quick kind of summary on what I heard, and then I want to give you guys a chance to react to that, fill in the gaps, the places that I missed, or correct me for what I said wrong, and add any other additional parting thoughts that you have. There's clearly excitement about the possibilities and the opportunities of AI in education. And one of the most important things is to find opportunities to create the space, to let people work with it. Creativity is really what's going to make that grow. And also leaning into what already exists. We don't have to start from ground zero. We have policies, we have practices, we have approaches that are tried and true, and it can be carried forward into what we're working on here. There are some risks, and those obviously have to be mitigated where possible, whether it's the hallucinations or bias or whatnot. So being aware of those and keeping those to the forefront to make sure that they are mitigated to the extent possible, and then embracing the entire community and finding new and creative ways to embrace that community will help elevate it to a much more positive experience and accelerate the adoption in positive fashion. So that's my take at 20 seconds. So what we talked about, you guys react to that. Tell me where I got it wrong, or add your own parting thoughts.
I feel like you had a GPT running and was just listening and did a summary for you, and you just read that. Yeah,
Right.
But
That was a very good summary. That was very impressive. I think the biggest thing for me is just that open-mindedness, that yes, this feels so different than, so many other resources, tools, revolutions in technology. But we've been here before, like you'd said, we have policies for these types of things. And so just keeping an open mind to the power of what these types of resources can create, and that, that's the biggest thing. I mean, we're learners. That's what we do as educators. We're lifelong learners. And so just remembering that is what we want from our students and what we should expect from ourselves.
for me, this is bottoms up and top down. Like there's no other way to do it because the tools are already out there. So to think we could just stop this and ban this, you're not doing that. You're creating inequity. So understand that you're in a place where, yes, you need to build some stuff at the district level so that folks can roll this out appropriately. But at the same time, realize that teachers and students and leaders are already using these things, right? And so ensuring that you have the right things in place, at least to make sure folks are safely using these things until maybe you get everything in place.
And my final thought is don't fear it. I think, move forward cautiously with those guide rails, but don't fear it, just embrace it.
Fantastic. You guys have been wonderful, insightful, and so on, Mark. I hope I can invite you back. We'll check in 6 months or a year and see how things are going. I'm sure that we're going to be surprised in some areas and very happy in others, and maybe disappointed, but hopefully the positive will outweigh the negative. I'm pretty optimistic that it will. So thank you for your time. To all you listening, thank you. I hope you can join us again next time. But take care. Bye.
Thank you for listening. ClassLink is proud to be the meeting place to facilitate these conversations. If you have a topic idea, send it to perspectives@classlink.com. To keep hearing our perspectives, be sure to follow us on Apple and Spotify, and subscribe to us on YouTube.